Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's Lunch and Learn, Turning Failure into Opportunity. It Takes a Village. My name is Simone Figueroa, and I am the president of You Thrive Educational Services. And before we jump in, I wanted to take a moment and share a little bit more about our organization for those of you who we may not have had the pleasure of partnering with just yet. You Thrive Educational Services provides proactive mental and emotional wellness solutions for college students to help manage stress, become more resilient, and thrive. And today we welcome You Thrive Educational Services key contributor, Dr. Tim Urdan. Dr. Urdan has been a professor at Santa Clara University since 1996. He was an assistant professor at Emory University in the Division of Educational Studies for 2 years before moving to Santa Clara University. Dr. Urdan received his Ph.D. from the combined program in educational psychology at the University of Michigan, his EDM at Harvard, and his BA in psychology at the University of California, Berkeley. His research areas include academic motivation, adolescent development, cultural and ethnic identity, and adaptive educational environments. And before we begin, I invite you to please feel free to use the chat function to introduce yourselves and throughout the presentation to ask any questions that you may have, as we will be leaving a few minutes at the end to respond to those questions. And with that, I will turn it over to Tim.
All right. Thanks very much, Simone, and thank you to You Thrive for the opportunity to be here today. I just want to talk for a little bit about dealing with student failure, experiences of failure, how universities and instructors and support can address failure and think about failure in an adaptive way to try and help students learn from failure and not be crushed by it. So I'm going to share my screen with you and have a little slide presentation. As Simone said, encourage you to put questions, comments in the chat. We'll monitor those throughout the discussion and address them as they pop up, or maybe at the end if I don't have a chance to see them and deal and address them right away. So I think of failure as sort of having three pillars in the college system to address failure. Um, the first one is student responses to failure. We want to think about how students think about failure, interpret it, and respond to it. So we'll talk about that first. The second one is instructor responses to failure. What do they say? What do they do? How do they either turn it into a opportunity for growth or not? And then institutional definitions of success and responses to failure. So those are the three areas that I'll talk about today. First, student responses to failure. I think it's important to keep in mind that many students come to college without much of a history of failure. They've often done well throughout their academic careers in high school and before. And so college is often the first taste that they get of academic failure. And for a lot of students, that happens in the first year. A lot of courses in the first year are challenging. It takes a while for students to get used to the schedule, get used to the sort of lack of supervision. They often go from high school experiences where they've got a class every day to college where it's a class, 2 or 3 times a week. And so there's just a lot more self-regulation that has to happen. And for a lot of students, it takes a while to sort of figure out how to do that. So um, often we're dealing with students who don't have a lot of experience managing or responding to failure. Some students come into college with a bit of an imposter syndrome, so they are not sure that they belong there in the first place, and they view failure as a confirmation that they really don't belong there, that somehow the university made a mistake and let them in, or everybody at the university, all the other students are smarter than them. And so their first failure can often be sort of a confirmation of their worst fears and lead to pretty significant withdrawal of effort and commitment. So for students, what that we try to do is to help students view failure, especially early failure, their first or second failure in a class, as something that is specific and temporary and not something that's global and permanent. So if you have a student that fails a test, you want them to be thinking in terms of, I failed this test, but I'm not a failure. And maybe the reason that I failed this test is because of something that is within my control. So one response to failing a test would be, I knew I just wasn't smart enough to keep up with, college work. And this is a confirmation of that. And there's no hope for me. I'm not going to be able to pass anything. And that kind of response to failure, that sort of pattern of explaining to themselves why they failed, just is going to lead to withdrawal. And you want to try and change that mindset to, I failed on this test because I didn't do something specific that I can do next time. So, if any of you are familiar with the Mindsets research and book by Carol Dweck, this is really what it's talking about: how to get students to attribute their failure to something specific and controllable, as opposed to something global and out of their control. So, when a student fails, to try and get them on track to succeed on the next one, to turn this failure into a learning opportunity, you want to try and get students to think about, what are the strategies that I could employ as a student to do better on the next one? What could I have done differently on this test or this assignment to have done better? And some examples of this are, maybe I've got too much going on in my extracurricular life. I've got a lot of distractions. I've got a lot of stuff that I'm doing that I don't necessarily need to be doing. And maybe I need to reduce some of those so that I have more time. Another strategy is really more of a study strategy. Um, Teaching students about how to study over time with spaced learning rather than just cramming before the exam. A lot of students don't really know or feel comfortable seeking help, going to talk to their professors during office hours, going to get tutoring if it's available in like a tutoring center. And especially students who might have a little bit of an imposter syndrome are often reluctant to go and seek help because they feel like office hours or tutoring are just for students who are failing, and they don't want to sort of signify to others that they're struggling. And so we need to find some way to help students think of these as resources that are available to all and things that everybody should be taking advantage of. So helping students think about their failure as something that's temporary and something that can be overcome with better use of learning and study strategies and support services is the goal. Second pillar is instructor responses to failure. So all of us have had classes where the first feedback that we got was on a test or an assignment that we don't have an opportunity or never had an opportunity to revise, and that we didn't really have an opportunity to get feedback on before we got the grade. So, what we want to help students sort of think of failure as something that they can learn from is to provide them with actionable feedback, provide students with a lot of information about how they can make the work better. And if that feedback comes at the end, where, along with the grade, and there's not an opportunity to revise it, you hope that they will take that feedback and use it for the next assignment or the next class. A lot of research shows that students don't do that. They see the feedback as just criticism and they don't really want to deal with it. So there's a lot of students that will just get the paper, look at the grade, and just put it aside and never actually even look at the feedback. Um, so instructors can avoid that by having uh, sort of check-in assignments or rough drafts along the way, and ask students to turn in work, provide feedback on the work, and then have students revise the work before they turn it in for a grade. This way, students are forced to sort of use the feedback that they get to produce a better product. And that's also reduces the stakes of not doing well. If a student turns in something and knows that they're just going to get a grade on it, that's a high stakes assessment situation. But if they have an opportunity to turn in drafts and get feedback on drafts, then those drafts are low stakes because they're not getting graded, they're just getting feedback. So, want to build in opportunities for students to actually experience failure, or not necessarily failure, but criticism, and use that criticism to become better writers, to become better thinkers, to do better on the test, whatever it is. So this makes more work for instructors, and so it's important to acknowledge that this is not necessarily something instructors want to do because it's a lot of effort. But this is where support services can come in as well. Um, uh, Students don't necessarily have to get feedback on their work from their instructors. They can get it from tutors. They can get it from other sources at the university if the university has those sources available. So this is what I was just talking about, opportunities for revision, informative assessments. Second thing instructors can do is let students know that you're there to support them. So students will tell you that they don't mind um, demanding or challenging instructors. What they uh, what they mind is being challenged without also uh, receiving any support to meet the challenge. So instructors need to be aware of how they're presenting the task, how they're presenting information to students, and whether they're asking students to just meet their demands without support. This is you're in college now, you're expected to be able to do this stuff, or to say, this is a challenge and I am here to support you. If you want to come and meet with me, if you want to show me a rough draft, whatever, uh, providing information to students to let them know that you can support them in this learning challenge is a way to help students think of their effort as being worthwhile. Final thing is, a lot of instructors will say that failure provides opportunities for growth, that failures are learning opportunities. Um, and these messages can be a little bit hollow if they're not actually accompanied by opportunities to get feedback and learn from failures or from uh, efforts along the way. So um, if there is no effort to improve on a bad performance because the first feedback you get is from the graded performance, then talking about how learning from mistakes is part of the education process is just not a reinforcing message to students. It sounds sort of fake. So if you're going to try and convince students that mistakes are part of learning, and if you provide motivational stories of people who failed many times and then overcame their challenges, you actually have to build in opportunities for growth in your class through feedback and through formative assessments um, to help reinforce that message. Finally, there's ways that institutions define success and respond to failure that also tell students what success and failure mean in that environment. So, is success defined in normative terms where only some students can succeed and most students lose? So, there's a lot of institutions, for example, that have grading systems that require instructors to give a certain percentage of C's, D's, and F's. This is based often on a normal distribution with a belief that um, that performance and ability forms a normal curve with only 10 to 15% of students at the top, most students in the middle, and 10 to 15% of students at the bottom. I don't know if that's really true or not. I mean, it depends on how you're defining success. Uh, but if that's the grading system that your university is using, then by definition, there's going to be, half the students are going to lose. And uh, if if that's the message that students get going in, then it's very hard to reach any conclusion after early failure that that's going to change. They just see it as sort of being built into the system, that the system is not designed for them to succeed, and it's going to be hard to maintain effort. Um, Grading on a curve is similar. It tells students that there's only a certain percentage that are going to be able to succeed. So an alternative way of defining success is more of a success as growth. Uh, where did you start when you got to the university or when you got to this class? How have you grown in the time that you've been here? What's the evidence of your growth? And developing a grading system that's based on that rather than a normative grading system is one way um, to define success a little bit differently and reduce the perception that school is about identifying winners and losers, and more that school is about development and growth for each student. Second response from institutions is, are there adequate resources devoted to tutoring and other academic supports? So, as I mentioned, a lot of times instructors might not have the time to provide good actionable feedback to all students on drafts of their papers. Um, and if they don't, it's important that the institution has uh, resources devoted to providing supports for students, opportunities for them to get feedback on drafts, opportunities for them to work on practice tests and see how they did and get feedback on that. So this is one area where institutions can provide a lot of support for students and help them think of failure more as opportunities for learning and growth and less as judgments about their overall worth as students. Um, in addition to sort of academic supports, it's good if institutions can have emotional supports for students who are struggling with self-doubt. A lot of times, it's not that students are not capable or that they're not putting in the work. It's that they just don't believe that they can succeed, or they don't believe that they belong there at the university. They just feel like they are in over their heads. And sometimes this is just a confidence issue. And so we have a lot of attention given to mental health resources on campus now, as there's been spikes in, depression and anxiety. But there's sort of a lower grade um, uh, anxiety that a lot of students experience just around their confidence and their ability to succeed. So institutions that can build in opportunities for hearing students talk about this and helping them think about their academic success and their academic efforts in a different way, sort of changing their approach to understanding what it takes to succeed and what attributions they make should they fail. This is a valuable resource that some universities have and others don't. So building in some opportunity for this kind of support for confidence is a helpful thing that universities can do. Another thing universities can offer is learning to learn courses to help students develop necessary study and regulatory skills early in college. A lot of students come to college without having felt real challenge in high school, and they've sort of cruised by on um, uh, talent or skill or uh, ease, and then they get to college and they haven't developed the study strategies that they need. So things like how to take effective notes, how to plan your time so that you have adequate time to devote to prepping for a test or writing an essay, how to develop outlines, um, things like that. And so universities that have some learning to learn course early for first year students find that these skills that the students learn help them throughout college and can help them avoid failure in the first place. So institutions that create these opportunities for students get a lot of return on investment for them. And there's models all over the country of universities that have developed good learning to learn courses. Um, Finally, is there professional development to help educators and instructors understand how to respond to student failure in a manner that reinforces buoyancy? Buoyancy is a term referring to how do we help students bounce back from challenges and from failure that they might experience? And a lot of instructors are never really taught how to do this. They just sort of are flummoxed by student failure, or they attribute the failure to students just not trying hard enough, um, or they just feel like it's not their responsibility. And so um, opportunities for instructors to learn how do I recognize when a student is experiencing a confidence crisis, or when they feel like maybe there is some imposter syndrome going on, or when I can see that a student is crushed by a bad grade and has withdrawn effort from that. This isn't something that comes naturally to instructors to know how to respond to this. So if the institution can provide some instruction, some workshops, some in-service training for instructors about how do you reframe challenge or failure so that students can rebound from that as opposed to being sunk by that, that would be very helpful for um, uh, instructors and for the institution as a whole. So um, to recap, I think the main focus here is that students will often experience their first failure in college, often very early in college, and they can respond to that in a variety of different ways. What we want to do is try and provide supports for students so that they don't respond to failure by giving up, by throwing in the towel. And when students see failure as a permanent setback, as a validation that they just don't have what it takes to succeed in college, it's really hard to want to put in the effort to overcome the challenge. Instead, you'll just see withdrawal and lack of effort, and maybe leading to dropping out. So, whatever we can do to reframe um, failure and setbacks in a way that students can see it as temporary and as something that requires them to employ different strategies next time, that will help students. And that message is only really going to resonate if there are actual supports in place in classrooms and at the institution level, and if there are actual opportunities for students to grow through their failure and not just be defined by it. That was all I have. So I'm happy to answer questions if there are any.
Thank you so much, Tim. And thank you everybody who joined us today. I'm just going to reshare my screen here. Yeah, so if you're interested in learning more about how to bring the topic of failure and overcoming failure to your students, we are hosting a learning lab next week, which features You Thrive content and exercises from our comprehensive student solution. I'm going to put the registration link in the chat momentarily, or feel free to scan the QR code that is being shared on the screen right now. I believe it's being shared on the screen. And also, we're going to be extending a 2-week free trial for our failure topic module to anybody who attended today or who will be attending our learning lab. And I'm going to check the chat here to see if we have any questions. We will be sticking around, both Tim and I. We're going to turn off our videos and mute ourselves. But if there are questions, we will come back on to address those. Let's see here. Joanne has said, thank you for this information. I continue to struggle with students who are avoidance gurus, but am employing new strategies, especially the You Thrive content. Hi, Joanne, and hoping for greater engagement this semester. I work primarily with students who aren't thriving mentally and academically. So she just wanted to share that thought. I don't know if there's anything, Tim, that you have to share to really kind of help those students that are tend to be avoidance individuals.
Yeah, I think that the avoidance uh, issue is one of those sort of signs that students might not be feeling like they can succeed in the environment. They might feel like avoidance is a strategy to fail without it being due to your effort. So, one of the worst feelings students can have is, I tried really hard and I still failed, because then it feels like maybe I just don't have the ability to succeed. And so, a lot of students will withdraw effort prematurely so that if they fail, it looks like it's because they didn't try, not because they lack the ability. And this is just a fear response, not wanting to confirm their worst fears that maybe I can't succeed here. So it's a tough one. I think that the challenge there is trying to encourage students to put in effort, and maybe providing low stress or low risk opportunities for putting in effort, so that if they fail, it's not for a grade, it's just a step in the process. And building in opportunities for small successes can help students overcome this avoidance tendency. But it's a tough situation. A lot of students are afraid.
Thanks, Tim. We also have two other questions that have come through. How do we help them not ghost when they are failing?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things that I would say. One is that don't be afraid to reach out to students who just stop showing up. So uh, sometimes, instructors are busy, or they're not sure it's their place to reach out. But let students know that you notice that they have stopped coming to class, and that you want to meet with them and address it. The other thing I would say is that um, ghosting is evidence of a faulty sort of response to failure. It is often sort of um, this failure represents a bigger shortcoming, something that I can't overcome. And if you can get the student to rethink about this, to think about this as a temporary setback, as a specific setback, and not as evidence that they will not, that they can't succeed, I would start with that. It's known as attribution retraining, getting them to explain their failure not as a global failure, but as a temporary specific failure that they can overcome.
We have another question. I'm currently using specifications grading for my organic chemistry course, in which my students can take different versions of assessments. I'm having trouble getting my students to figure out how to learn when they don't pass the first time. They are just sort of taking the shotgun approach by trying to retake and retake and retake without reflecting. Any advice?
Yeah, this uh, is evidence that students are seeing the assessment as just something to get through rather than as a learning opportunity. And so one approach that instructors can take is to have students, instead of just retake, try to explain what they did wrong on the first one, and what a new approach might be that they can take to approach it the second time. So asking students for reflection before they jump in and just retake the test, or um, asking them to reflect on why they're using this assessment strategy rather than a different one, is just pauses the system for a little bit and gets them thinking about what might be a better approach. But a lot of times students just want to kind of get through it, and so they'll just keep trying and failing, trying and failing. So making them reflect makes them a little bit more um, aware of their own processes, which is good. Metacognitive.
I think we have time for one more question. Um, Someone shared, I just had a meeting with a student who has not done any assignments. It appears he was dealing with a lot emotionally. I suggested he go to the counseling center, but he's afraid to talk about his emotions. How can I assist him with this?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I would say that to try and make the situation a little bit more normative. So sometimes students feel like if they seek help, that they are the ones who are failing, or and maybe they're the only ones. That makes that they're weak, that they are acknowledging that maybe they just can't cut it. And so trying to make it more of a normative experience. Look, a lot of students struggle with this or at the beginning or are struggling right now. There's a lot going on in the world, and that it's very common for students to seek help with this. That's what the counseling center is for. It's private; no one's going to judge you. But if you can sort of get help for this, it will really open doors for you to be able to approach your work in a different way. And you don't want to let this block you from succeeding in college. So um, something like that.
Great. Well, thank you again, everybody, so much for attending. We hope to see you next week at our Learning Lab. And if not, at our next event, we will be doing another thought leadership in December. So be on the lookout for some information on that. Thank you again so much, Tim, for joining us. And we hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you.